Hi everyone, it's Mike Stevenson here. Today in the video we're going to talk about the Ignite 2023 announcements for LogicApps. First up, wasn't it great to see LogicApps really heavily represented this year? In the past it's been a big challenge for integration people, the lack of real discussion around LogicApps, the lack of information about the things that are going on. So I think getting LogicApps out there at a big summit like Ignite will really accelerate customer adoption of LogicApps. We'll find lots of people getting more excited about some of the things that are going on. You can see here we've got this really exciting list of stuff the Logic App team are doing. So, first off, congratulations to the team and great to see so much going on. What we're going to do is we're going to go through a few blog posts and take a look at some of the detail of these announcements. So first off, we've got the article here by Bina. So this is a good overview of some of the things that have been kind of going on at Ignite. So we've got integration environment. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment and what that means. We've got the workflow assistant down here. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. We've then got the GA for custom code in LogicApps. We've got some App Insights stuff, the VS Code extension, the mapper, and then there's a bunch of other stuff around other technologies that Azure Integration Services involves, things like API management and messaging. So I'm going to break down separate videos to talk about these areas. So let's start off with this article up here. So there's a great article by Kent. So great work, Kent, on this article, talking about the Azure integration environment and also business process tracking. So these are the two key things in here. So with the integration environment, now public preview, I know that this was initially announced at the Integrate Summit in June that we're going to be working on this, and this is the first public preview of it. The idea is if we take a jump over to my slides, actually, I'm just going to kind of draw my understanding of the idea here. So in Azure, when I'm building AIS solutions, so I'm going to have things like my API management, but I'd be developing lots of APIs. And then I'd have my service bus with lots of queues, topics, all over. And then I'd have LogicApps over here. And then we've got, so imagine that was a consumption logic app. Then we've got a standard. And we've got workflows. And the problem is one of the challenges customers have had is it's a bit like this scattered group of Lego blocks that are all over the Azure platform. So the idea of the integration environment is to kind of put a container around this and then be able to sort of see that these things kind of work together. And sort of start giving this holistic view across the top. So my thinking here with, if we think about where Kent's worked in Microsoft, who's kind of one of the drivers behind this idea, is Kent's worked in the Power Platform area. Power Platform has this concept of Power Platform environments. So let's say we've got an environment. I can't spell. Let me just correct that. Then inside an environment, we've got solutions. And then inside a solution, we've got resources. So you might have had a Power Automate, you might have had a table, and you might have had, I don't know, like a Power App form or something. And you've got this kind of hierarchy of stuff. And I think Kent's thinking to me is very much a bit like that concept of where Azure's going bottom up, you build the resources. Power Platform's almost going a bit more top down, where you build the environment, then the solution, then the resources within that. So you've got these groupings. I think that's where Kent's mind's kind of thinking it'd solve a lot of the problems that customers have. And then in Power Platform, your deployments are based around solution deployments into an environment. And I think Kent would like to have something like that longer term, where that integration service environment starts addressing some of the challenges around deployment, and then integration becomes more of a product than a platform in some ways. I think to me that's some of the thinking behind the integration environment. So here he's talking about, if we go through this article, he's talking about sort of breaking up your resources by things like business unit type breakup, where you might group stuff, and that kind of thing. So here at the minute we've got support for these resource types. So the first thing to probably note there is that's only a subset of the kinds of things people use in Azure integration services. So that fits very much in line with this being a preview. But it's great that we've got support for queues and APIs and LogicApps. The question might be, to me, thinking about the bigger picture of solutions we build, it's probably going to be a challenge organizationally for Microsoft when each of these resources are built by different teams. How do they kind of get those teams to contribute to this shared thing, this integration environment? So that's something we've regularly seen organizationally as being a challenge for Microsoft in the past. But hopefully they'll all see benefits from this and on board with this idea, because I think it's a good sort of step forward. Excuse me, let me get rid of that mistake there. So next up we've got business process tracking. So again, this is another feature in public preview. And the idea here is that if we build an integration solution, going back to that same problem before, when we have many logic apps working together, how do we get this holistic view? So we had things like App Insights and Log Analytics available. We had third-party products like Serverless 360 who offer business activity monitoring as a mature feature. Business process tracking's trying to provide something in the middle. So this was something a lot of Microsoft customers felt was a gap, where how can we get a little bit less technical, low-level logging to see something a bit more useful. So Kent walks through a customer scenario here. So a couple of things to note. Once a business analyst has defined the business process, so that's thinking along the lines of the old BizTalk BAM feature, where somebody defines a process and then we implement something that maps to that. And then as we go down Kent's customer scenario here, so actually one point just to shout out for Kent is I love seeing these articles where there's a good use case behind them. It really kind of makes it translatable to a real world scenario, not just like a technical how to do this, but translating it like this I think is really good. So we see this business process for power outage here. So we've got multiple steps in a common process where systems are going to be communicating across this business process, and you can see Kent sort of indicated how the process translates from the CRM to the work order and then to the marketing system for feedback. So this is quite a good end-to-end business process. Now, what we'd probably find in the real world, especially here, we've probably got an integration here between CRM and the work order management. I guess there's a question about how these bits might work, because they sort of are inside the work order system, but maybe that's communicating out to other systems down here. Maybe that would integrate in some way that could do business process tracking, and then we definitely would have an integration here at the end of that process. But this, I really like this. That this is kind of good content. So Kent's covering both business process tracking and the integration environment in one article here. So we can see he's going through that process of creating the integration environment. So this is a great article to help us get up and running if you signed up for this preview. You can see here we start seeing these ideas like integration environment, resources, and my things like my infrastructure connections, which I think I'd expect to see in the future lots more happening there. So Ken's going through creating an application, so he's got his Power application, and then here he's added resources to this application, so we can see here he's got LogicApps and APIM, and actually that's looks like it's an API within API management, so we can see the things spread out across Azure starting to be grouped together in this application. So here's his Power Outage app here inside the integration environment. So this is starting to look good. I can visualize how in the future we just have more apps being built here that do integrations, which is quite interesting. So here he's moving on to the business process tracking piece. So creating a business process. So he's providing names and he's got a business identifier here. So I guess this is like a primary key of some kind that'll be unique for a transaction. So I think that this is a bit that could be quite interesting to me, because I think in the example here we're talking about things like an order ID or a case ID or something like that. And the question would be, well, what happens if we have the same process executed multiple times for the same order for something like that? So you probably need to really think about how this transaction ID, the unique ID, kind of gets created and then reused across multiple interfaces and instances of the same interface. So here we're moving on to defining your process stages. So this is going to be a bit like back in the BAM days for BizTalk, this would have been your visual designer created for your tracking profile. So you're going to be adding stages here. We can see we add some stages, we add some custom properties here. So we've got name, phone number, etc. This is the kind of the fully designed process. So first off, maybe just note that it's a very sequential process, this one. So it'll be interesting to see more complex processes where I've maybe got, some kind of branch going on. Oh, that looks a bit like the Logic app icon. And kind of that one jumps down to here. And these more complex processes sometimes start kicking into play, but certainly we can see this kind of makes sense here. We can imagine a process ticking off these high level steps that it goes through. So this is where the key bit here, this is where we start doing this mapping between a business process and the logic apps. This is where it starts getting technically difficult. If you're building this as a product, so on the Microsoft side, how do you correlate something happening in an API or in a Logic app or something like that that maps to this designer here? So here you can see we've in the tracking profile, we've got here an indication of which Logic app, which workflow, and then there might be an action here, I guess, as well, and there's some kind of mapping. So this really is it's quite interesting, this mapping between how how this Logic app is going to be running a message, and then how the tracking profile is going to kick this out to the business process tracking module to tell it that's happened, and then it has to map to the like the right instance. So let's say we've got this power outage. There's 100,000 power outages in a given area. Which workflow matches to which customer's power outage case? So one of the things I wonder here is, obviously when you're doing this designer, question number one would be, well, actually, if I'm designing the business process, but then I'm starting to do the map, and this probably makes the assumption that my logic app's already built, my workflow's already deployed, otherwise I wouldn't be able to do the mapping. But then normally you might do the business process up front. So I don't know quite how this is going to work. So this is where using the public preview will sort of answer some of these questions about how do I do the mapping when the logic app doesn't exist yet, and that kind of like refactoring and changing of logic apps I think is going to be really interesting. And here you can see an example of what Kent's logic app actually looked like. So I think if you look in here, so this is where we've selected the action. So this is actually opening up the logic app, and then we're choosing that shape here, and you can see in the designer. So in the designer here, this is the business process designer. This is one of the bits I was just trying to get my head around. So here we've got the workflow position indicating that we've got this this action here, and then these were the properties that were defined in the profile. So actually, we're sort of indicating which properties we want from the workflow itself and what things are available in the workflow, and mapping them to those track and profile properties. So that's quite interesting. I wonder, my thinking when I see this is I wonder about that. We've got the two streams where the developer is building the workflow and changing it over time, and then we've got the business analyst is developing the tracking profile at the same time. How we've got this kind of backwards and forwards here between developer modifies the logic app, BA needs to use what's in the logic app to build the tracking profile, but then the developer, theoretically, if you think about the BA, that would they not be using the tracking profile to help tell the developer what to build? So I think there's a bit of playing around with it to kind of understand how that would work. So we can just see the details. One thing I really like here though is the fact that this is coming from the properties available, and the workflow is going to make that easy to help put together that tracking profile. And then we've got some stuff about the deployment here. So these tracking profiles are going to be injected into the tracking profiles subdirectory in the artifacts folder of your logic app. And then there's a thing here about the ADX instance needs to be online. So we'll talk about the ADX bit in a minute. It needs to be online to be able to do a deployment. I think that's probably a point to note here is that the deployment's only available in the Azure portal at the moment. So this again comes back to this being in preview. There's obviously a lot more work still to go on this. It's nice that we can deploy straight from there. So when I think about my DevOps later on, I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this evolves, where we deploy from a pipeline. I know there's been mentioned in the article about the roadmap would include deploying these profiles from a pipeline, so maybe they just become a file in the logic app itself and they deploy side by side. Would be quite interesting. Actually, I think one thing that is quite interesting here is if we think about the tracking profile, just maybe a question, I'm probably have to look into how we answer it later, but I'm deploying this into the tracking profile. So we had that logic app, and if we think of our deployed logic app on Azure, we've got these folders, and we had the artifacts, and then we had the tracking profile folder. So if my business process has stuff from multiple from multiple logic apps, say I've got a second logic app, so I have my artifacts folder, and then I have my tracking profile here. If I deploy this tracking profile, but it actually uses step 1 comes from this logic app and step 2 comes from that logic app. So which one does it deploy it to? Or does it deploy it to both? That's one of the things I from using the preview, I'll be interested to understand how that's going to work. Okay, so viewing business process transactions. This is where we start. We've done the hard work to get it going. We're starting to look at the exciting data we'll be able to see. So we can see we've got our profile deployed here, which is cool. We can see we've got our transactions, and there's our business identifier, so we can see our case number. Again, that asks the question, what happens if there's multiple runs for case 1117? So we'll be looking into that scenario later on. And then here, this is the cool bit. So here, the user is going to click on that case, and we get this visual here showing me what's going on. So this is where that simplification to democratize integration is really cool. So here I could have a business user or a support person looks at that, and instead of seeing 100 logic app shapes, they just see these easy to understand sort of milestones within the logic app, which I think is quite interesting. Right, so we get the bottom, so we've got some considerations here. So stateless workflows not currently supported. I've given the product team some feedback, I think, on stateless workflows. So I think, to me, I would like to use stateless workflows a lot more than I do now. The big problem is, without having any run history or anything like that, stateless workflows become difficult to support. So I think having some kind of dealing with that problem would mean stateless workflows become easier to use. So I would see, actually, I would like to see that as a feature, because I think the workflows that I build, often you would have 2 or 3 workflows work together, and if one of them can be stateful, but the other 2 can just be like a unit of work which is fairly stateless, I think there'd be performance benefits for the platform. And you would almost be like stateless by default and stateful when you need it, and then things would perform a lot better. But the problem is, without having any view of what actually happened, that becomes really challenging. So therefore, at the minute, nearly all of my workflows are stateful, whereas I'd like that to be the other way around. So I would like to see that eventually. That'll obviously come later on. If you notice in the future investments, CI/CD is something they're looking at. So currently support an integration environment for APIM, Service Bus, and Standard. Looking at what we've seen so far, the business process tracking, I guess, is only LogicApps Standard. Monitoring's kind of a bit for the future. Notifications, tracking, etc., etc. So really positive public preview we can get excited about, start looking into some stuff. Still a lot on the roadmap for the future, but it's good to see some big steps forward since this was announced at Integrate. I guess a couple of things to maybe note as well. What the ADX behind the scenes is going to allow you to do things like workbooks and Power BI to leverage that data. So what I want to do is just take another slide here and just talk about how I see this working, just so we're really clear. So in LogicApps, what we're going to do is we're going to end up with this ADX, Azure Data Explorer instance that I would deploy. I've then got my integration environment, and then I've got this is the concept. I know there's still a bit to go on this, but then I've got my app, and then my app here, and then in the background on the platform sort of side, I've got these LogicApps here, and then I've got my service bus with all these queues, and then I've got my APIM, and then these get added to an app as required, so I get this visualization. And then from the tracking perspective, my BA is developing a tracking profile which gets deployed into my Logic app as my Logic app executes. So if we imagine we've got our App Insights instance here, so that's pushing out my technical telemetry here, telling me, all of the individual low-level stuff. And then here I've got my business process tracking data going out to ADX, and that's where that tracking profile's catching the events that you care about, pushing them to ADX, and then you can kind of build, so that the tracking profile view reads data from here, and I guess they're going to be looking at that within the integration environment, as I think how that all kind of hangs together. Okay, so the next announcement we had was from Divya. So I'm just going to bring up my article here. So nice job by Divya here on this this Logic App workflow assistant. So one of the interesting bits here, I haven't quite figured out this, but I don't know why it's being called workflow assistant when everything else is calling them co-pilots. I haven't quite got my head around that. I think there is mention in the article about it referred to it as co-pilot, but I think we should just be get in there from the start. Let's just call it co-pilot, in my opinion, because that fits with the branding of everything else. So if we go through and we look at what the workflow system does, so I'm going to claim cheekily, me and Sandro, a little bit of credit for the idea of this, because we presented the idea of using ChatGPT with LogicApps at the Integrate Summit in the summer. Nobody was talking about that beforehand. And we said when we showed people this, it was like, we hope we inspire the team to go and do some cool stuff. It looks like they've gone and done that, so hats off. It looks like a really exciting idea, and I hope it's something we would be using a lot. So it uses Open AI and ChatGPT behind the scenes. The idea is to provide something to help you build Logic apps. So there's mention down here from Divya of some of the use cases. So this one here, so I've actually done a YouTube video about how to do this one here of describe my workflow. So this is really cool. So how many times do you look at a workflow and it's got a million shapes in it, you haven't got a clue what it does? If you can just ask the co-pilot to say, tell me what this does, and it goes and just describes it. So that's one of the YouTube videos I did 6 months ago with ChatGPT, and it was pretty good. And what I was hoping is, and I don't know if Microsoft have done this, but hopefully longer term, in the AI, there's some kind of integration model starts being developed where it learns and trains off the different workflows about what actually is integration, and these descriptions can become more useful by understanding lots of what people are building. So connectors, how do you choose the right connector? So that's quite a good one. Recommendations on patterns, on scenarios. So that all looks like quite obvious things you would want a co-pilot to do. So that's really cool. So we've got support for LogicApps standard at the moment. A few limitations are mentioned here. So just really top level info about what they've announced. I hope like to get a chance to play with this pretty soon. I'm sure other people have already started. I think one of the things that's going to be really interesting in this space is about the security angles and governance angles. So I'm assuming Microsoft, when they look at your workflow, they'll be sort of sanitizing it so that obviously your workflow is going to have secrets and custom logic to your business in it. So I think at some point there's going to be a discussion with cybersecurity teams in the organization about, do we actually want to use this feature, or is there some sensitivity about it? I think that'll be happening across the board for all of the different co-pilot things. I think Microsoft will obviously recognize that and be making some big investments in making sure that technically there's a solid story, but also communication wise there's a solid story as well about how it's helping you and it's not a risk to you. Um, Things like chat history not preserved, but what happens behind the scenes, I think is a quite interesting one. It's a fantastic discussion area, actually. I think that in technology. So the next one we had was Wagner's article here. So great to see Wagner putting some content out about the DevOps stuff, which I know he's investing a lot of his time in making Logic App have a better DevOps story. So the idea here is how can we make it easier to get up and running with Logic Apps with the VS Code experience. So I remember I ended up doing a blog article about this a while ago because what's setting up a new machine is quite challenging. There's lots of stuff to install, and I think I ended up doing something like a Chocolate script or something like that to do it. But the idea of what Wagner's talking about is, can I set it up with just as few clicks as possible? He's mentioned here things like some of the complexities around dependencies for things like C# and other stuff. So hopefully that's going to make my life a lot easier. You can see we've got some just description behind the scenes about all the things that you do. And Azure, if you're doing local development, Azure one of the key bits you need. So again, they're doing some stuff to kind of make this a bit more seamless. I think one of the interesting challenges in this space is if you look at this bit about the loading existing projects, as they develop all these new features, we think about things like the C# one we're going to come on to in a minute. All these new features require subtle tweaks and changes to your solution and how you develop and stuff. So keeping on top of this DevOps story, I think, is really important. So Wagner spending a lot of time on doing this, I think, is going to be good for the product. And then he's just mentioned some of the limitations at the bottom. The App Insights announcement. So this one's really about the GA of these enhancements for App Insights. So I had a few chats with Kent quite a while ago about this, and I knew they were working on some changes and trying the preview out. We had a bit of back and forward about some of the cool things they could do. So the idea here is a couple of things. So if we go through, Kent's talking about in this article some of the benefits about the data that appears in the telemetry being just more useful and more rich. We take things like here redundant data across tables. This was where you have to look at all the different tables to work out what's going on, and kind of making that just a bit more rationalized, I think, is going to help. Big one here, reducing the amount of storage required. So this was one of the things that was like a bit of a hidden gotcha with LogicApps, is there's so much going on, you could quite easily end up having a high volume of data in App Insights. So having Microsoft tune some of that, but also giving us some knobs and dials to tune it ourselves, I think is going to help us out a lot there. You can see again, there's some tuning of this traces table, so reducing the amount of verbosity here, making exceptions more descriptives, I think, is a really good one. Making it easier to filter is going to be really good as well. So there's lots of good stuff in the App Insights features that have come out now. Kent had this article earlier in the year about the preview, which I think is worth looking at if you want to understand the background. So they went a bit more into detail about what they're actually doing and how it would work for the preview. Now, there's quite a lot of stuff in here. What they really got to is after put all of this stuff in this article on one side. When now it's GA, this is the key bit that you need to do, is where you're really just changing the schema version. I'm not sure. Might be worth double checking from the GA announcement the name of the property, but effectively there's a property does that thing where it moves you to the V2 of App Insights for LogicApps, and then it does all of the new stuff for you. That's the only thing you really need to change. So it's great to see that one coming out. Next up, we've got the custom code announcement. So here, another article by Kent talking through the idea of being able to use custom code inside your Logic app. So if we think about what we used to have to do, so let me just jump onto the board a minute and talk this through. So in my Logic app, I would have these workflows here doing stuff, and we had a challenge around what to do for custom code. So some of the options were you could either build a function app that your Logic app could make a call out to over HTTP. If you were on consumption Logic apps, you had that inline code in the integration account. For Logic Apps Standard, you had the ability to put JavaScript that you could use inside the Logic App Standard. And now basically you've got the option to have a C# DLL as part of the artifacts in your the library folder, I think it is, that your workflow can call. It leverages the fact that it's got functions available, because it's on the function runtime, but really it's just this code's written in C#, and the Logic app's effectively calling it on the local host. This is where, when we see Kent's article here, you can see he's defined a function here. He's passing in his parameters, and then because it's got this workflow action trigger, the Logic App Designer can see this, can work out these properties, and then it's effectively calling this function on the local node that it's on. And then here you're just doing all the normal C# that you would do. And you kind of, if you see here that return type, you're probably going to use a C# class to model out a response object that's going to be returned, and I assume it would, most cases, it's going to serialize to either JSON or a string of some kind. So this just simplifies the model of how we're going to be able to get code here. So you can see here, we're calling a function in this Logic app. So this is going to make loads of really good scenarios. I guess if we think back to our BizTalk world, this is kind of the equivalent of the expression shape in a BizTalk orchestration now. I think there's some good things and some bad things with this. It could get abused where you just have a Logic app that looks very much like this, but this does like everything in C#, but you're benefiting from the workflow run history and a few other things. That might be quite interesting, but I'm sure that can be heavily abused. I think the intention of the function call here is to just encapsulate sort of small, medium, simple-ish logic to help your workflow, but then not necessarily trying to write some kind of million line long C# class, but it just gets called by the Logic app, of what that looks like. Now, here's some examples of where you might use it. So shaping messages, parsing data, some quite cool ones. I think probably an anti-pattern here would be if you were doing like an adapter class. So you were actually writing C# code to call a system. That's probably a bit of an anti-pattern because you've got the connectors. You can do the service provider model where you can build a proper connector to run. Likely the built-in connectors would be a better way to do that, so I'd probably stay away from doing that. So that would be like adapters and calling the systems. So if you're using HTTP client in that code, or you're using database connections, you're probably starting to abuse that. What the intention of it was. There's some examples of stuff here that you probably don't want to run. That's a good one. That's interesting that it can run for 10 minutes, which is quite interesting. I think there is a couple of things about the .NET Framework version that you just want to kind of maybe read a bit more out as you start using that. And Kent's got an awesome video down here. Go and check that out if you want a deeper dive on this. I'm hoping today we get you interested in checking out that feature. There's also another article Kent did from the preview. Just want to call that out too. So go and check this article out where he goes more and more in detail about how this works. I think it's the same example, but just a bit of a deeper dive. So here, this is a really good one where we could see the design properties calling that function app. It'd be quite interesting to try what happens when you change the function app. How does it affect the designer? And if I change the properties or something, that would be quite interesting. And maybe there's some functions where you want to pass in just a JSON object or something like that. That would be quite interesting as well. So it might be interesting to see how it might interpret the serialization of a model class. And then the final announcement was the data map at GA. So Microsoft have been working on the data mapper for a while. It's now gone into GA. So article by Alex here, just summarising what's kind of been happening, what you can do with the mapper. I think one of the interesting bits for me for the mapper is a kind of what seems to have gone a bit more quiet on the map front. They were talking about the mapper quite a lot, maybe around the integrate time, but there hasn't really been a lot of stuff I've seen about it. Maybe I've missed this, so apologies if I have. But I feel like the mapper's kind of a little bit lost interest as the sort of work on the integration environment and the business process tracking's taken. I've got a lot more sort of discussion around it in the community. So hopefully, map a G and A, but the question is going to be, well, actually, for me, the mapper needs more to be doing with it, more enhancements, make it cooler, do more stuff. So I'm kind of hoping that it doesn't just pause and we keep going with the mapper and do more with it, because improving the designer experience, making it quicker, automating testing, dealing with much more complicated maps. I think, there was a lot, it was kind of like getting the version 1 of it out there so people were using it, taking feedback, doing more. I think it's really, really important to keep building, keep it going. Don't just kind of pause because we've got it GA. I think we need more in the future. Sandro's wrote some really good articles about what you can do with a mapper and some of the challenges you might have. So go and check those out if you want to read more on that. But for me, if we go back to my slides, so over here, where are we? So to me, this was a very, I'm going to draw a smiley face because I'm really happy. Really happy with the LogicApp announcements at Ignite. It was fantastic just to see LogicApps get so much airtime compared to previous years, and hopefully this video helps people find out a bit more about what's going on, what things you can go and check out and use. And I think for me, the ones that I'm personally most excited about, the GA of custom code, these two at the top, I think they really move the product forward. The other enhancements are kind of much more about making it more just efficient to use these products. They're both equally important, but these ones here are the really exciting ones. Thanks for listening today. Hope you enjoyed this video. Please subscribe to the channel so we can just get more feedback from people and keep everybody up to date with what's happened. If you like these ideas about just reviewing what's going on, I think as well, let me know in the comments, because I'm thinking I might do some more of these videos if people find them useful, just to get that overview of stuff that's happening and just share my thoughts from an integration developer perspective. Cheers.